A genocide so brutal, so calculated, that in just 100 days, nearly 1 million people were slaughtered. Dead bodies laying in the streets. Neighbors became murderers. Families killed their own. 15% of the population vanished within 1 year. And the world watched and did nothing. This wasn't an explosion of sudden violence. It was decades in the making, a slow, deliberate march toward one of history's darkest chapters. But how did it begin? Who was truly responsible? And why did the international community let it happen? From mass graves to global betrayal, this is the raw, unfiltered story of how Rwanda was torn apart, and the brutal fight to rebuild. The seeds of genocide, how colonial rule set the stage. The Belgians created ethnic divisions to control us. President Kagame. Before European colonialists arrived, Hutus and Tutsis were not rigid ethnic groups, but social classes. But when Belgium took control in 1916, they weaponized identity, issuing ID cards to label Rwandans as either Hutu or Tutsi. The Belgians favored the Tutsis, giving them administrative power, while treating the Hutus as second-class citizens. The resentment festered. When Belgium reversed course in the 1950s and handed power to the Hutus, the tables turned and the cycle of violence began. How post-independence politics turned deadly. The Hutus took power and all hell broke loose. Rwanda gained independence in 1962, but peace never came. The new Hutu-led government, fueled by decades of resentment, began systematically persecuting Tutsis, forcing hundreds of thousands into exile. For years, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, led by Paul Kagame, fought for the right of exiled Tutsis to return home. But the government, under President Juvenal Habyarimana, had other plans. The war begins. The planned extermination of the Tutsis. The genocide was planned long before the president's plane was shot down. On April 6, 1994, President Habyarimana's plane was shot down over Kigali. The government blamed the RPF, but many believe Hutu extremists orchestrated the attack to justify mass slaughter. Within hours, roadblocks were set up. Militias had kill lists. Weapons had already been stockpiled. This was not chaos. This was a well-coordinated extermination. The weaponization of hate speech. Tutsis were called cockroaches. Then the killings began. For years, Radio Télévision Libre des Mille Collines, RTLM, broadcasted hate speech, calling Tutsis cockroaches and urging Hutus to kill them. At the height of the genocide, the UN and Western governments refused to spend $250,000 to jam the station. $250,000 could have silenced a machine that fueled mass murder. They chose not to act. The church's role in the slaughter. The church lured people in and slaughtered them. For many, churches were places of refuge, but in Rwanda, they became slaughterhouses. Priests and nuns turned Tutsis over to killers, or worse, participated in the massacres themselves. Thousands were burned alive, hacked to death, or buried in mass graves outside church walls. Faith twisted into genocide. The UN's shocking failure. We met with UN officials. They ignored our warnings. The UN had 5,000 peacekeepers in Rwanda when the killings began. Their commander, General Romeo Dallaire, begged for reinforcements. Instead, the UN withdrew troops. 5,000 trained soldiers could have stopped the bloodshed. But they left, right when Rwanda needed them most. The West's silent complicity. Why did France and Belgium let this happen? France armed and trained Hutu militias before the genocide. Even as the killings escalated, French officials continued supporting the Hutu government. Belgium, which had created Rwanda's ethnic divisions in the first place, did nothing to stop the bloodshed. And the U.S.? President Clinton later admitted the U.S. could have stopped the genocide, but chose not to. The aftermath, rebuilding from ashes. How did you stop soldiers from seeking revenge? When Kagame and the RPF finally overthrew the genocidal government, They faced an impossible challenge, rebuilding a shattered nation without descending into endless cycles of revenge. Kagame made a radical decision. No revenge killings, no purges, only justice. Instead, Rwanda turned to Gacaca courts, a grassroots justice system where perpetrators faced their victims. Survivors and killers were forced to live side by side. Somehow, Rwanda healed. The ongoing fight for justice. Mass murderers are hiding in the West. Even today, many of the masterminds of the genocide live freely in Europe, Canada, and the US. France, Belgium, and other Western nations refuse to extradite them, allowing them to escape justice. Why? Why does the world still turn a blind eye? Final thoughts. Why Rwanda's story is still ignored. 1 million dead and the world didn't care. The Rwandan Genocide is one of history's greatest failures, not just because of the killings, but because of how easily they could have been stopped. A genocide fueled by colonial legacies, political greed, and international betrayal. And yet, Rwanda survived. It rebuilt, and under Kagame, it became one of Africa's fastest-growing economies. But the question remains, why does the world ignore Rwanda's story? Because acknowledging it means admitting that global powers let it happen. And that is a truth too many would rather forget. What do you think? Should the West be held accountable for its inaction? Should those who enabled genocide face justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because stories like this deserve to be remembered.